Half-Life Alyx, Analysis of Player Choice. Half-Life Alyx, or Alyx in short, is not the first VR game in the market, but it might well be the one we look back on as the most important in cementing virtual reality into the gaming mainstream. Like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom did, and indeed the original Half-Life too, it could be that we look back at gaming as pre-Alyx and post-Alyx, if only because it brings the weight of the Half-Life franchise to bear. The statistics seem to bear that out so far, with Alyx reaching 43,000 concurrent users on launch day according to a Games Industry article. In my previous video essay on the historical evolution of player choice in computer games, I noted that fully 3D environments haven't yet been utilized to their full potential, and that the move to VR might expand the possibilities for player choice. Given its likely popularity and impact on the consciousness of gamers, it begs the question: does Alyx actually represent a quantum leap in expanding player choice? In an attempt to answer the question, I've watched a 7-hour playthrough of the game and shorter clips from other players with a view to catalogue how the game allows the player to interact with the environment. VR hardware or its ergonomic properties are out of scope because I'm not reviewing specific vendor equipment, and to be perfectly honest, I don't have a VR set. This isn't intended to be a full review of the game either, only an analysis of the player options. These are of course my thoughts. Some level of subjectivity is to be expected, but I will try and provide footage evidence to illustrate. Of course, feel free to comment with your thoughts if you agree or disagree. So anyway, here we go. A 30,000 foot view of the game shows the same structure as contemporary FPSs. It has the same expositionary narrative approach as many others of the genre. It shows no player character actions and tells by dialogue from both the protagonists and NPCs, but none of it entails any choice on the part of the player. The story is set. The core of gameplay lies in combat with groups of enemies combined with physical interaction with objects within the environment. In that, it's a standard Half-Life game, but of course the devil lies in the details. Let's look at Gunplay. In a non-VR game, you use the mouse to change where you're looking at and where you're aiming. You press one mouse button to fire and another to enable a secondary mode, most often aiming down sights or sometimes firing grenades or other secondary ammunition. Typically the inaccuracy of firing from the hip is simulated with a built-in error margin in the reticle displayed on screen. Aiming down the sights simulates careful aiming and improves accuracy. Some games have leaning mechanics or cover mechanics to peek around corners and fire with reduced exposure. Once you've expended all ammunition, you press a key to reload. So generally you press one button for each action you want to take. In VR, there's an inherent separation between where you're looking at and where you're aiming. It's just part of the different control schema. That means there's no need for dedicated mechanics like leaning. Everything is done by the placement of your body and hands. You can fire from the hip, aim down sights, or even blind fire around corners by choosing how you position your hands in relation to your eyes. Pressing a button gives the player one option. You either press it or you don't. But the placement of your hands offers far more options to the player. Not only that, it also takes significantly more time to execute each action in VR. You have to balance the effort and time required versus the benefit of taking each action. The same applies to reloading. It's not a simple single button press anymore. In Alyx, you have to remove the spent clip, pull a fresh one from your backpack, insert it into the gun, and pull the receiver to load a new round.
In it comes, and then press button or slide. Okay, so I need to literally grab a clip, slap it in, pull the slide, even though that ejects a bullet, so why do I do that? I don't know how guns work, but it's fine.
Self-evidently, handling a gun is far more complex in VR than it is in a normal FPS. But so what, you might ask? Sure, the control scheme is more complex, and that might seem to offer more options. But are the choices offered meaningful? I'd argue yes. And the primary reason is combat stress. When watching a variety of players going through the game, it became abundantly clear that they experienced something similar to combat stress. They missed point-blank shots and panic-fired.
Okay, this is fine. fine. Uh-oh. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No. Oh, God. Crap. Okay, this is...
They dropped clips while reloading.
Reload to this. No, into the, knee to the...
3 more.
Slightly panicking.
They reloaded but forgot to chamber a round and frantically pulled the trigger even after it became obvious that it wasn't firing. They failed in ways that you just can't in a normal FPS. Alyx managed to marry the pressure of a gunfight with the complexity of firing and reloading to create conditions where the player experienced combat stress. That's just not possible to the same degree in a normal FPS, and represents a significant change to gameplay.
You go. Oh, shitting hell! No! Okay, go in, clip. I wasn't emotionally ready for any of this.
The possibilities are also interesting, as I've alluded to in previous video discussions. In an FPS, your character always knows the basic skills of handling a gun. They know how to throw grenades. They know how to hack traps and machines. So the success or failure of an action lies entirely with you, the player. But in an RPG, your character has a variety of skills, and you won't necessarily know how to do everything. Maybe you didn't invest in gun skills, so recoil is close to uncontrollable. Maybe you don't know how to hack traps. Maybe you can't throw grenades as accurately. While Alyx itself does not utilize character skills, VR opens up the possibility for greater integration of player and character ability, and that makes choices made in character customization meaningful. Outside of combat, the impact is not as pronounced, as it's mostly about how objects in the world are manipulated. Opening doors or windows now involves grasping the handle and pushing or pulling. It might not sound like much, but the act of manipulating a door offers significantly different functionality than in current games, where opening a door is a single action. A door is either open or closed. But in VR you can choose to open doors all the way to pass through, only a crack to check what's on the other side, or anything in between. It's your choice, depending on how you want to approach it. You might even be able to use the door as a shield in combat, opening it to fire and closing it to protect yourself. Alyx doesn't seem to cater for the following, but opening a door might also become meaningful if you were using a two-handed versus a one-handed weapon. A two-handed weapon like a rifle might require you to accept significantly more recoil and less accuracy as you try and fire it single-handed. Another possibility might be the option to jam the door to delay pursuers, even if you didn't have the key to lock the door. Physical attacks and throwing objects to cause damage is not an option. Throwing grenades isn't significantly different from existing games. You aim and throw, just in VR. But one area where Alyx noticeably lacks in capability is in causing physical damage by throwing objects and physical attacks. There's no crowbar, and certainly no throwing knives or similar. Given that other VR games like Blade and Sorcery are focused on physical damage, it seems that this was a deliberate choice on the part of developers. You can, however, use objects within the game to block physical attacks, particularly jumping headcrabs. It also seems that objects have their own damage resistance properties. Using wood for cover doesn't provide as much protection against gunfire as more solid materials. That indicates that there is potential for utilizing physical objects in a realistic manner, even if it wasn't implemented in this particular game. For instance, barring a door might delay pursuers for shorter or longer periods of time, depending on whether it's a wooden door or a steel door, and whether you used a broom or a steel crowbar to bar it. Throwing objects for other purposes works as expected. You can use bottles to sometimes distract enemies, and throw or push objects onto the barnacles to temporarily remove the tendrils.
Just grab that and now just toss that in that direction, and as soon as it gets nice and high up,
That's not fundamentally different from normal gameplay.
It didn't take care of all of you stupid.
For example, throwing stones to distract enemies in Far Cry is a thing. One noteworthy requirement is the need to use two hands for certain heavy objects like barrels. That means the player must put away the weapon and be temporarily vulnerable. Not a huge change, but it does mean that your hands are out of position and you have to drop the item carried and pull out your weapon again if you're attacked. Two-hand carries also exist in non-VR games, but they only require a single button press to drop the item and pull out the weapon. You're never in as much risk as you are in VR. Catching items is also similarly a more involved activity. Now you can easily fail to catch flying objects, which might have consequences like greater difficulty in throwing back grenades. On the other hand, it might mean that you can catch them before they land and throw them back in one motion if the player is sufficiently skilled. But beyond the change in input mechanics, that's not a fundamentally new feature. The pull mechanic on small items, justified in the game by globs, seems to be a design choice to work around the reduced movement capabilities of VR, rather than an attempt to add new capability. Puzzles, as used in Alyx, tend to be fairly standard, especially the electric grid ones, and the rest are manipulation games but extended to the 3D space.
Hang on. The opposite. You want me to line this up so all of these get crossed over. Okay. Well, in that case, if I just do about here, job done. Okay, nice three-dimensional virtual reality puzzle.
It will be interesting to see how future developers extend the standard minigames like lockpick into the VR space. We'll probably be seeing a combination of the rotation to find the sweet spot like in Skyrim, and the depth game in Oblivion where you target specific tumblers. But is that the best we can expect? Time will tell. Beyond the manipulation of systems, Alyx also includes several mechanics where the player interacts with their virtual body. Early on, you're told to raise your hands to surrender.
Yeah, this is fine.
Later on, you hold your hand to your virtual face in order to avoid coughing to alert the enemy.
Hey, those things are nasty. You gotta cover your mouth.
Got it. Thanks.
Hey, I almost forgot. What's your name? Alyx.
This is entirely new to VR, and while the uses in Alyx are rare and arguably gimmicky, it's an avenue of control that shows promise. Some enemies splash goo onto you and that affects your vision. It didn't seem to be a mechanic in Alyx, but in Metro games you press a key to clean your gas mask, so wiping your face clean could easily be incorporated as a feature. You might have to press a button on your virtual body in order to initiate communication with teammates. Ammunition could be stored in different pouches instead of the generic backpack method that Alyx uses. Possibilities exist that are yet to be fully explored. Alyx also includes other features that have no effect on gameplay, but are intended to increase the cool factor. You can use board markers to write on windows and other glass surfaces. You can fiddle with a radio tuner. You can play pianos. These are all gimmicks in this game to help popularize VR, but it might be possible to extend their use in future games to be more useful. For instance, you might use writing on windows to communicate at a distance without creating sound, or in a situation where something like jamming disrupts radio communications. You could use hand signals to communicate silently where speaking might alert enemies. Setting traps might involve actually using your fingers to manipulate wires. On the whole, Alyx represents both a significant step forward and incremental improvement to enhancing player choice. The significant step forward is in actualizing combat stress through its combination of gun-related mechanics. Alongside that, there are incremental improvements that range from useful, such as opening doors, to gimmicks, such as playing the piano. Arguably most of these incremental improvements are obvious derivations of the move to a new control schema, but the potential they demonstrate should not be ignored. Further games in the VR genre will probably build on that potential, but Alyx leveraging the Half-Life franchise to shine a spotlight on VR is likely to be a reason why such games come to be. For that reason alone, Alyx is likely to be remembered.